So tonight we're going to be looking at silvopasture and trying to answer the question, was it a medieval agricultural practice, or is this something that's fairly modern and newfangled? I'm Daire O Lochlainn. I reside in the Shire of Airysguard in the Kingdom of Avical. So I'm in the shadow of the Canadian Rockies. I'm pointing out the back of the house, which is pretty useless because you probably can't see my arm in the video. But when I'm pointing that way, that's my back garden, and the back of my back garden is the Rocky Mountains. So it's when I say in the shadow of, it's literally there. This was originally written and presented for the Ethelmark Royal Foresters Guild as part of their challenge. They do an annual challenge where you do a number of activities and get points for them, and everybody shares their stuff on the Ethelmark Foresters Facebook page, and we have a lot of fun over there. But I was invited to represent it, so I am more than happy to, and I hope that everyone gains a little bit from it. So, silvopasture, what is it? According to the U.S. Forest Service, U.S. Department of Agriculture, it's the deliberate integration of trees and grazing livestock operations on the same land. These systems are intensively managed for both forest products and forage, providing both short-term and long-term income sources. Broadly, it's a subdivision or subdiscipline of agroforestry, agriculture, forestry, trees for money. Medieval, is it part of the medieval milieu as we recognize it in the SCA? Quite often in our book of hours, basically the medieval equivalent of a calendar, in October, November, you'll quite often see an image something like this. You have somebody out with a beating stick hitting acorn trees, knocking the acorns to the ground, and the pigs come in to eat that, get fattened up for slaughter for the winter. And this is a system called pannage or pannage, P-A-N-N-A-G-E. As I said, November, and France 1324 to 1328. That sounds like it's smack dab in the middle of where we play this SCA game. Today's class, as I said, we're going to see if we can place this more broadly in a medieval milieu. And right now, the research is kind of at a point where we have more questions than answers, but now the questions are being asked. The answers are starting to come thick and fast. So this is a pretty interesting area if someone wants to pick it up and travel further with it, because almost monthly there's new publications coming out, particularly from Central and Eastern Europe. We're going to go back in time a little beyond our normal SCA period. We're going to go back to a post-glacial European landscape. And then we're going to go forward from our usual SCA time period, and we're going to look at some modern European Union conceptualizations of silvopasture agroforestry. And it's from that we might be able to pick out little things that we can do in our own locales. I know a couple of people in the group have properties of a couple of acres or more, so there might be some ideas here that they can make use of in their own backyard. And this we're going to look at the concept of restoring nature's balance, which is a weird thing to say when you're saying let's throw commercial cattle into a commercial forest. That doesn't sound very natural, but we might see that it's more natural than we think. Hopefully gives us a context to move forward from in our thoughts and deeds. Gives us a vocabulary for future searches if people want to get interested in this topic. You'll leave tonight with a vocabulary that will let you get in and dig around a bit. And I'll keep flagging up what I'm considering these three critical references. So, medieval silvopasture. Excuse me. If you do nothing more after this evening than pick out this paper, Dolly Jorgensen and Peter Kelch, Origins and History of Medieval Wood Pastures. If you do nothing more than track down this article and read it, then I will consider tonight a success. Wood pastures is the medieval-ish term for silvopasture. And as I said, I'll be popping the web locations for the references if you guys want to grab the PDF and have a snoop at them yourself. So the Jorgensen-Kelch paper it has an introduction of sort of medieval silvopasture in general, and then it breaks down into subsections. And the reason I think this is a great paper is if you're anywhere from the Frankish kingdoms from the 5th to 11th century for your persona, there's a subsection for you. Anglo-Saxon England, 5th to 11th centuries, subsection for you. Spain and Portugal, 13th to 19th centuries. Yeah, you have your own subsection. Central Europe, 14th to 18th centuries. Hungary, Romania, Czechia, Slovakia, Bohemia, and then the Scandinavian countries, 14th to 18th centuries. So a lot of our more traditional Western and Northern European personas have their own subsections within that Jorgensen and Kelch paper, which I think is great for the foresters in particular to snoop around and pick up some more information about the forestry practices in their neighborhoods, their personas, neighborhoods, and times. Okay, so yes, please, if nothing else, take away tonight, take away this paper. So, origins and history of medieval wood pastures. So, the deliberate integration of trees and grazing livestock operations on the same land is what the USDA and US Forestry kind of said was the definition of silvopasture. And these systems are intensively managed. So that's kind of where we started tonight. But what if it wasn't? If it wasn't deliberately deliberate integration, and what if it wasn't intensively managed? What if it just sort of happened, and we as humans saw it happening and refined it, for lack of a better term? So I'm going way back before our SCA period, and we're going to have a look at the origins of where this silvopasture may have come from. The white, obviously ice, and this is around 22,000 years BP, so 20,000 years BCE. You'll notice Iceland up in the corner there. You've got the Faroes parked in the North Atlantic there. The ice mass around them is quite small because of the heating effect, warming effect of the surrounding seas. Down here, the Alps were much farther south, but we're at altitude, and that's where we're getting the extra cold to allow for the ice sheets to stabilize. And out here in the Caucasus as well, we've got this peak of land where we have the glacial extreme. I've already mentioned this corner up here where we've got the warming trend from the ocean itself. So we're going to look at this red arc as kind of being the ice limit. And most of the audience tonight is North American, so we're going to do the same thing. We're going to look at our current ice up in Greenland. The little star down on the bottom left here is me in golden. And this zone of effect line, that I've just put onto the map is essentially the equivalent of that line in the European landmass. Okay, so we would have seen. Sorry, no, my mistake. This is zone of effect from the current ice mass. Okay, so the current Greenland ice mass. My apologies. So that ice mass up there is sending cold south as far as this arc. And then, so if we go back, here we go. This makes more sense to me. Sorry about that. The zone of effect for Europe would have been right down basically to the Mediterranean. And that wiggly line, I've drawn that intentionally wiggly because it really is the limiting factor of the warmer water masses, the Mediterranean Sea, the Caspian, the Black Sea, Aegean. All of that is kind of where the cold coming off of the northern ice mass is being dissipated by the heat of the warm water mass. So the ice is affecting the climate right down, Greece, middle of Italy, northern tip of Spain. It's even though the ice isn't there, the effect of the ice, the cold, is there. And this is what the zone of effect looks like. This is northern Saskatchewan. I grew up on the Canadian prairies, and you fly 4 hours north of where I grew up, and this is what it starts to look like. It's basically muskeg, what looks like land between these patches of lakes. Most of that you can't walk on. It's just boggy. But if we look down here, you can see the river, a rather substantial river running through, and there's actual forest on the riverbanks. Now, this river is having a localized environmental climatic effect, drawing temperatures high enough to actually support free growth rather than just brushland. And this is a bit of what I was saying about the zone of effect. The ice caps further up are freezing out the land, stunting growth, etc., until you get to a more significant body of water, and then you get that local warming. So we can pretend this river at the bottom here is the Mediterranean in the previous maps. But it's really neat to see you going from sort of chest high dogwood brush to quite significant poplar and white cottonwood stands. Some of the cottonwoods are getting 120, 140 feet tall. So there's some big effect of this small warming channel. Trust me, we're going to get to the medieval soon enough, but we need context. So I grew up being taught that if left in peace, the land would progress towards a state of climax forest. The process was linear. The succession through time would lead to peak biodiversity. So the climax forest is the most biodiverse element of this this progression. Apparently still the dominant thought. University of Chicago, June 13th, 2025. They posted a little explainer about ecological succession. So this is less than 6 months ago, and it's still this, everything moves towards the climax forest. And it's almost like there's an intent, which is pretty crazy because I don't really think plants have intent other than saying to themselves, my job is to survive. But I don't think the grass says, I need to be here as grass so that next year we can have dogwood, so that 10 years from now we can have poplars. I don't think this progress is quite as designed as the literature suggests. So this is what we've got. We start with bare rocks. We then get lichens on the rocks, small annual plants and lichens. This helps to develop a soil base, and grasses and perennials anchor into that. Shrubs and shade intolerant trees such as pines start to grow in. And finally, we have our oak, birch, hickory, etc. in our climax community. This is very eastern seaboard of the United States centric as far as the way the succession occurs and the way and the trees that they mention in their succession. So it's a very North American centric presentation of a lot of the ideas, and that's just the way the literature is. That's where a lot of it gets written. So that's all they see out their office windows. So the bare rocks, essentially you've had your glacier go through and it's scrubbed everything clean. So we are starting 22,000 years ago with a clean slate. We've got the progression, and that progression is dependent on this red line. That red line is soil development. So that red line, until the soil becomes deeper, richer, more stable, you don't get the succession to the larger plants. So I think what's happening underground, the soil itself is probably more important than what's happening above ground. It's almost like the under is the cause and the over is the effect. So the peak biodiversity seems to be somewhere out in this climax forest. But I think if we move away from just looking at the plant life as the climax community, if we start looking at biodiversity to include the animal life, each stage of the succession has a lot more biodiversity than the literature gives those areas credit for. And if we look at the bottom of the slide here, I'm just crossing out the words hundreds of years. This takes thousands of years for what we've got on the eastern seaboard right now. You guys probably got out of your ice about 10 to 12,000 years ago. You got out of your area or zone of influence probably 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. So this isn't hundreds of years. This is thousands of years. Okay, secondary succession. We have a fire. Everything burns down, and we go back to doing our cruise to the climax community. The big difference here is if we look at the soil starts not at bare rock, but starts at the the climax community soil from previously. So the secondary succession can be much more rapid because you have a significant and substantial soil base for the plants to grow into. And we get to our climax community. For years, the national parks that are like 20 miles from where I am, their big thing was control fires always, always, always. And then they suddenly realized that they had more biodiversity if they allowed for or controlled prescribed burns. So my question is, if you're going into an area that has been overprotected, shall we say, from fire, and it's becoming less and less biodiverse, and then to increase peak biodiversity, you have to go in and do some prescribed burns to add more species in the secondary succession. Does that not sort of knock holes in this whole concept of everything leads up to this climax community? That's just me being a conundrum guy. This yellow line through here in the middle, above it is that thin black line. That thin black line is the charcoal layer. I can go up my back garden. I can dig a hole anywhere on the property, and somewhere between 6 and 25 inches, I'll run into a charcoal layer. And that charcoal layer is late 1880s. When the railways were first going through here, one of the old steam trains let out some sparks, and a couple of tens of thousands of hectares burnt off, including what was on our property. So I can see this secondary succession every time I put in a new fence post for the dog garden. 50 to 150, 5 to 150 years, 150 years plus. So this time we are looking at centuries. We're not looking at millennia because we have that soil substructure for everything to grow back onto. So what do I think? 1880s. I'm looking at 140 plus years of the regrowth since that major burn event. Unfortunately, we almost had a repeat of that. We could stand on our deck last summer and watch the Parsons Fire, which was 14 miles down the highway from us. So we were on evacuation alert, and basically had the dogs collared and ready to go, the cat in the box, and our most valuable possessions sitting in the car waiting for us to go. Luckily, it never got to us. The winds turned and it blew itself out, going back and trying to reburn on the previous burn, and it died. So we were very lucky that we didn't get a repeat. Glaciation. Glaciation basically does the same thing, except it might take out a bit more of the subsoil. So secondary succession can also be post-glacial, not just a fire event. Prescribed glaciers are something very difficult to create. I'm not sure that we have the wherewithal to actually create a new glacier. I don't think we have that much control over the environment yet. Unfortunately, we seem to have enough control to go the other way and melt the little bit of ice that's left, but that's another conversation. Okay, so most of the European literature, most of the medieval literature is European. So let's look at a climax forest in Europe. And when was the photo taken? I should have made a note of when the photo was taken. This is within the last, certainly within the last decade, possibly the last 5 years. So we've got mature deciduous trees. You can see where the previous generations of trees have died and been left in situ. A lot of the nutrients available go back into the soil from that. There's certain areas in the picture where you can actually see a nurse situation where you've got a downed tree and you've got things growing out of it. So a beautiful, lovely green and vivid landscape. Got the water running through, everything looks nice and textbook. My question is, this is a controlled environment, you've got a big fence around it, and what's missing? What's missing? Cattle. In the medieval period, it would have been aurochs, which are basically big cattle on steroids. They're massive animals. What we in this country and this continent would consider elk, what the Europeans will tend to call red deer, the bison, European wood bison in particular, and primitive horses. That's what's missing from our pretty picture, because this is a controlled environment where all of the herbivores are kept out. And one of the ones they really like to keep out is our buddy, the boar. Apparently the wild boar is the nastiest thing in the forest. It'll kill everything on sight. Again, I'm not convinced of that, but the textbooks like to tell us that. So I think we've had a bit of look at origins or context for the origins, i.e. we've gone back 22,000 years. Every once in a while you get a disruptor. Somebody who comes in and says, the status quo doesn't make sense to me. how about this for a theory? And disruptors quite often uh, get poo-pooed and slammed for a number of years. Um, in my lifetime, probably the greatest disruptor was his name slipped my mind, the gentleman who basically brought the plate tectonics theory into the 20th century. Um, Prior to that, there was some idea of plates moving, but no one knew how or why. He went on tour in Alaska, saw some big plate shifts up there after earthquake events, and then thought to himself, maybe this is a bigger thing. And that's where our modern concept of plate tectonics come from. Vera, this gentleman, Franciscus Wilhelmus Maria Vera. Obviously, his parents were very cruel to him. He wrote Grazing Ecology and Forest History in the year 2000. So it's 25 years old, but it's still a disruptor document. Remember, we saw the slide where the University of Chicago, I think, was even this summer, 6 months ago, saying this is the succession and this is how it works. For 25 years, Vera has been saying maybe not. And again, if you actually want to go look at the paper, you can grab from the internet the PDF readily available. So what was the disruptor concept? What was Vera's outrageous hypothesis? He said that Europe was mainly savanna or park forest thanks to the presence of the large grazing mammals. Wild cattle, wild horse, wild pig, European bison, which prevented trees from dominating the landscape. In his view, rather than deforesting and thus transforming the European environment in a dramatic fashion, agropastoralists, your silviculturalists, and silvopastoralists, in effect, maintained the basic character of the landscape until recently. And this isn't me saying this, is a gentleman doing a review of Vera's work in 2002. And he basically said that Vera disagrees with this idea of the climax forest and the peak biodiversity, and that the large grazing mammals make a huge difference to how we get this succession, both primary and secondary. So again, that paper is available. So this forest is false under Vera's model because those big animals aren't there. This is much more what Vera thinks the European continent looked like. So I'm going to drag you back to my zone of effect. Remember, we had the big chunk of white ice up here, then we had the Greenland below it, the uniced land below it, but there was a zone of effect where the cold from the ice was pushing down and wreaking havoc on the environment. In that zone of effect, it wasn't climax forest, is Vera's argument. It looked like this. You've got your large grazers, and these large grazers are actually quite small compared to the aurochs of the medieval period. But you can see this beautiful, clean, flat, straight line where everything has been crown lifted. The cattle have gone through and browsed and taken everything they can reach. And then you have the forest canopy above that, and you have the open, clear ground below. If these trees are dropping their seeds, and these cattle and other browsers and grazers are coming through, they'll be disrupting the new growth. So instead of being a continuous forest border to border across the entirety of Europe, you've got these islands of trees with larger grass-like, savanna-like areas. And you can sort of see that here. Oops, my apologies, I hit the wrong button. In the background, you can see one island. In the foreground, you've got the two trees, possibly a third one behind it, sort of starting another little island. And Vera says this was the norm, not because little farmer guy, you can see half of the farmer on the right-hand side of the slide, not because little farmer guy went in there and created this. It's the cattle, the horses, the bison, the deer, um, the little piggies, the wild boar, were creating this. And when the environment was stable enough and warm enough for humans to move back in post-glaciation, this is what they were finding. They didn't create it. We humans didn't create it. The animals did. We saw that it was a good thing for us to possibly come in and take advantage of. So we um, picked up where nature left off and maintained this silvopasture practice uh, for millennia. Um, in Eastern Europe, this was going on until the 1950s. Western Europe, not so much. Okay, so instead of thinking of the Sherwood forest covering the entire country, this is what Vera suggests um, pre-medieval and medieval Europe looked like by virtue of the mammals, the big ungulates chewing everything up. Rather than deforesting and thus transforming the European environment in a dramatic fashion, the agri-pastoralists, in effect, maintained the basic character of the landscape. Okay, it wasn't us that went in and transformed it; it us went in and recognized the value of it and then maintained it. So we're now getting slowly, finally, 32 minutes in to the medieval uh, pastoralism. Okay. In Jorgensen and Quelch, they cite a gentleman who says, rather than a history of the woodland itself, what is needed is a history of woodland use. And as I said, I wrote this initially to present for the Ethel Foresters, and that statement could not be more Forester if we'd written to this guy and said, "Could you make a Forester line for us?" So this is very, very Forester-esque. It was Wickham in the Jorgensen and Kelch paper who said this. So now we're getting towards the history. We've had origins. We're now at history. When we stepped in as humans to control this environment that had previously been controlled and maintained by the large grazing mammals, our biggest influence was through coppicing and pollarding. So coppicing, you cut back to essentially ground level, and everything reshoots. Pollarding, by contrast, is essentially doing the same thing, but doing it above head height. Whose head? Usually the head of the grazers. So whichever animals you don't want to eat your fresh shoots in the coppicing, figure out how high they reach and pollard at that level. If we jump back here to our happy little cows in the field, they've essentially pollarded with this crown lift as they've eaten. So we're just mimicking that with our agricultural practice. Why coppicing and pollarding? If we think about a tree, it has a finite life cycle, and during that life cycle, it produces a finite biomass. Trees start, you start with an acorn, you end up with an oak. The oak gets really big, eventually it gets old and dies. Why does it get old and die? It loses its ability to draw water and nutrients up the column. Basically, it becomes too tall, and in a good season, it's drawing water right to the top. The fresh shoots, the fresh leaves are doing their job. We're getting chlorophyll, and therefore we're getting food back into the plant. Give it a couple of years of poor water supply, a couple of years of drought. Suddenly there's less water to draw. The water doesn't get drawn up into the canopy. Therefore, the leaves don't green. You don't have green leaves, you don't have chlorophyll. you don't have food for the plant, the tree itself, the tree starts to starve. Sustain that drought long enough, the tree basically starves to death because it doesn't have the water to maintain its life cycle. Coppicing and pollarding limit the column stack height. Okay, in coppicing, the column stack height is essentially ground level. It's not the 200-foot sequoias. It's not the 100-foot oak. It literally is 6 inches. Pollarding, let's call it 8 to 10 feet. So we've limited the stack height of an oak to 10 feet when it could have been 100 or 120 feet. If we limit that stack height, it's got to get pretty dry for there not to be sufficient fluid, sufficient groundwater, sufficient rainwater as well to actually draw up that 10 foot of the column. Okay, so we lose that limit on natural growth. Life cycle essentially becomes infinite because the tree it maintains its ability to draw water up the column. It doesn't die. By pollarding, we essentially make a forever tree. With our oak tree that's growing wild, it does its 100, 120 feet. It will drop deadfall over time. And then when it reaches its terminal growth size and finally dies off, that mass will return to the earth as the tree collapses and rots away. Remember the picture of the forest in Czechia with the big deadfall logs even going into the stream. That's the natural biomass. That's all there is. It's finite. It's limited. If we coppice or pollard, we periodically reduce the mass of the plant. We take that mass, we do something else with it, and then it regrows. Okay, so we essentially create not only an infinite lifespan for the tree, we also create potentially an infinite biomass. And when I'm saying infinite, I'm talking relative. It's it becomes an ongoing source rather than this tree grows, gets tall, dies, falls over. We have a tree that we can go back to again and again and again and get resources from. And those resources are essentially the tree's biomass that we're stealing away and then encouraging to regrow, stealing away the regrowth, encouraging more to regrow. So when we crop these coppices and pollards, we crop for a specified need. Somebody might be doing basket weaving. Okay, we're going to grab those shoots of willow 4 months into the growing season. We might be doing fence posts. Okay, we're going to wait. We're going to wait 4 years so that we have something as thick as a man's wrist. So how often, how frequently we crop is determined by what our end goal is when we return to get that infinite biomass that we're now starting to manage. Coppicing, being that it's ground level, it is theoretically easier to do. If you can kneel or bend from the waist, great. You can coppice. If you can kneel or bend from the waist, you can crop from your coppice. Basically, nice and easy. The risk is that ground level growth allows for the animals to browse. So unless you can control animal access to your coppiced forest, you're competing with them for that infinite regrowth. So therefore, we pollard above the animal browse height, which allows the preservation of the regrowth for human use. We get to do with it what we planned. The other side of that coin is with pollarding, you can also holly trees. You can crop that for winter forage, things like that. So we might not be doing our pollarding this particularly for our own human benefit. It may be for creating a feed for the animals. So we're getting a secondary benefit from it. We're getting the animal product, not the tree product. The other problem with pollarding is you need to get up the tree, and so we start getting into the world of ladders and health and safety and all that fun stuff. A lot of the books of hours, the European books of hours from the medieval period, um, the pannage when you knock the acorns out of the trees for the pig feed. It'll be young boys up the tree. They've actually climbed the tree and are shaking the branches or beating the branches with a stick, rather than someone doing it from ground level. So yeah, the swineherd is the one who gets to go up the tree and violate health and safety and all the fun stuff. Okay, graze versus browse. Point of clarity here, grazers primarily consume grasses and other low-lying vegetation. Browsers feed on leaves, shoots, and twigs of shrubs and or trees. Okay, so if I was coppicing or I was pollarding and I was doing it for fodder, that fodder would probably be called browse. Okay, I would be cutting a shrub or tree source of food. So it would be browse. It wouldn't be grazing fodder. It would be browsing fodder. Sheep we have for wool and aren't too destructive. Goats are very destructive. They will eat anything and everything. So if you had a choice between sheep and goats, and you were in a graze or a browse situation, in both cases, the sheep is the lesser of the two evils. The goats they just wreak havoc on everything. Pigs have a reputation for being very destructive as well. But there's also fairly good documentary evidence that pigs don't do the level of damage that the goats do, and in fact, they help turn over the soil when they're looking for bits and pieces, as opposed to plowing through the soil and eating everything in sight like the goats do. The pigs tend to be less destructive of the new growth. So if you had sheep and pigs, you probably had a good forest management system. If you had goats, perhaps you didn't. And you just have to go to modern day Greece and have a look around, and you will see that writ large. I've gone for hikes in the Greek mountains where on the way up there's been a rental car parked and goats in the parking lot. I've come back down, the goats are in the car eating the steering wheel rubber, eating the stuffing out of the seats. Yeah, so goats will eat anything. Wood pasture. So one of the things about the wood pasture is that it produces shelter for the animals. I may have the reference in here, I may not. They did a study of cattle in open field and cattle in a wood pasture, and the wood pasture cover was something just less than 10%, I believe, of the land mass. But even with that less than 10% cover with the trees, the cattle were going to the water drinkers something like 30 to 60% less frequently. So evenings and mornings, they were going 30% less frequently. Peak of the day, heat of the day, up to 60% of the water consumption was reduced by the solar protection from the trees. Um, so these huge cattle farms that we have over the hills from me in Alberta, which are thousands, if not millions of hectares of barren land, that's not good for your animals. They're out there roasting. Um, the wood pasture gives us grazing, browsing, and leaf fodder for our farm animals. It gives timber and fuel wood to the home. Crops of acorn and other mast can be used for pig feed or used to create flowers. Um, the that November that November etching is basically the pannage is fattening the hogs for slaughter for the winter food for the humans. Modern silvopasture. Um, Modern silvopasture is going for this biodiversity concept. And again, this is kind of relatively new thinking because even up till June this year, University of Chicago was saying peak biodiversity is when you have a climax forest. People are looking at that and going, no, biodiversity is needs to be considered earlier in the spectrum, the succession. And the big thing we're losing is pollinators. So if we move back a bit towards the grasses and the shrub stage, as opposed to the full tree stage, we have a lot more feed and forage for the pollinators. We don't have pollinators. Most of our grains and fruits uh, uh, don't mature, and we as humans will starve. So we need our friendly birds and bees and pollinators. The animal welfare aspect. This is what I was saying about the trees protecting the cattle from heat exposure, and measuring that in how frequently they were accessing their drinking water. Economics. Um, in Eastern Europe in particular, a lot of this is tourism, but also the governments are seeing in Europe we need to protect the pollinators in particular, and a lot of the farmers are actually being paid not to farm. So the European Union, the European Economic Council, maybe, will give subsidies if you do set-asides. And this is fairly typical of what I would see when we were living in England. I was there from like 1998 to 2013. My wife is an equestrian, and um, she'd drive up to the stables in the truck, or the van. I'd get on the bike and ride my bike through the forest and lanes and meet her there, throw the bike in the back of the van and drive home. And this is what I would see a lot of. You've got the hedgerows, the roads behind that hedgerow. You've got some mature trees in the hedgerow. You've got your monoculture farming on the left side, right side of this picture. But you've got this set aside, this strip of weeds, as the farmers call them. And this strip of weeds is basically where the biodiversity is being regenerated, particularly for the pollinator forage. So these set-asides, you actually earn more money from not doing anything, just letting your set-aside grow, than you do from the active farming going on right beside it. Again, I mentioned tourism's a big push, um, and returning to a traditional way of life. So it's a cultural aspect to this as well. Unfortunately, most of that culture isn't tied to tradition. Tried to it's tied to tourism. Um, there's very little of Europe where anyone currently alive remembers doing this as a child, or remembers their grandparents doing this type of silvopasture. There are sections in Eastern Europe, um, Slovakia, Czechia, Hungary. These areas, from a European view, they failed to modernize due to Stalin and his collectivization of the farming. This failure to modernize actually maintained biodiversity and maintained some of the modern silvopasture techniques. It brought them forward from the 19th century. So uh, Stalin wasn't all bad if you're a tree. Okay, yeah, so this failure to modernize was retention of some traditional practice, some 19th century practice. Varese Spinelli and co. Silvopastoralism, forest planning, and nature conservation. Proposals for sustainable management strategies. This will be fairly recent, and it's going to be basically the modern EU thinking, European Union thinking of how to do silvopasture correctly to increase biodiversity, yet maintain or improve economic stability in regions of Europe. So again, this is available online. You can have a peek at it, and it may be something that you can do on a much smaller scale on any properties that you have access to. So that's me saying, go read that, learn some things, be nice to your environment. And this image, I cannot, for the life of me, find the original source for it. And I struggle to get a clean image of it. If we start at the bottom, we have our basic monoculture farming. You've got a stream in there, you've maybe got a hedgerow in there, and you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 animals might visit the neighborhood. You start doing things like the set-asides in that middle column, that middle band of image. You're doing set-asides, you're perhaps bringing in fruit trees to the environment. You're making your patches of monoculture smaller, and you're diversifying your monoculture plantings in a much smaller patchwork. And the biodiversity skyrockets immediately. And in the top, you have the species biodiversity of the animals has come back because the silvopasture agroforestry concepts are being managed correctly. And it might be slightly more labor intensive, but it does take it back to it takes farming back to the community level as opposed to the sort of agricultural industrial complex level, which we're seeing in Alberta and Saskatchewan, up here in Canada. So it doesn't take a lot to really make a big change. I mean, the set-asides in England, the biodiversity change was almost overnight and way, way, way bigger than anyone even hoped it was going to be. So even if we're doing it, even if you're a city dweller, if you're doing it in your back garden and somebody on the next block is doing it in their back garden, and you guys get together and convince somebody on the third block to do it, it can have an impact. So please think about it, and if you're doing something for yourselves, if you do something for your neighbors, and mainly you're doing something for the pollinators, which is completely selfish because without the pollinators, we're going to go hungry. There's a reading list. So as I said, we kind of missed the medieval portion. But really the medieval portion was essentially the slide where the cattle were in the field with the islands of trees. And those islands of trees, Vera argues, were the natural state because of the large herbivores, and that the medieval experience of silvopasture was really a a finer management of what they found the large herbivores were already doing, and that the first paper I showed you, the oh come on brain, the Jorgensen and Kelch paper. That one is the SCA paper. If you want to know what was happening in your area for your persona, find that paper, and you can feed your persona with a little more knowledge of that earlier forestry period. Just a couple of more references. Today's class, we look mainly at the post-European glacial landscape, post-glacial European landscape, and how our concept may not be what the textbooks have been telling us. There is a change in thought. The disruptor paper from Vera 25 years ago is starting to gain traction, particularly in Eastern and Central Europe. The medieval agricultural practice was to refine what the big herbivores were doing, essentially through coppicing and pollarding. We looked at a few modern EU ideas, restoring nature's balance. That's this biodiversity, particularly for the pollinators. And hopefully we've learned some places we can get some resources and where we can move forward from to learn more. And the 3 critical references. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing.